All right, so we're diving deep today into something really interesting. When we think about Elvis Presley, you think about gold records and screaming fans and Graceland.
Mm.
But there's another side of the story that often gets overlooked, and that is the financial side of things.
Absolutely. I
Well,
think especially as we're going to see today, uh, you can't really separate those things, right? The personal life, the financial realities, and the legacy of someone like Elvis, they're all intertwined in really fascinating ways.
yeah, and that's what we're going to try to unpack today.
Mhm.
And our starting point is this legal document, a trust deed from 1977. And what makes this document so intriguing is that it reveals this significant financial claim that Priscilla Presley held on Elvis's property even before his death in 77. And crucially, this includes a portion of the land that Graceland sits on. So it's not just about some random property, it's about Graceland.
And that right there, that connection to Graceland, I think that's what really piques our curiosity right away because it raises all sorts of questions about their relationship, about the Elvis estate, and about the future of Graceland itself.
Exactly. So as we go through this deep dive with us today, we're going to try to answer a few key questions. First, what exactly is a trust deed in this context, and what kind of power did it give Priscilla? And second, what was the financial reality of Ellis's estate after his passing? And why is that so important to understanding this whole story? And finally, the trust deed is from 1977, but it wasn't officially resolved until 1983, 6 years after Elvis's death. So what connects those 2 points in time?
Right. There are all sorts of things that could have happened in those intervening years. So yeah, we need to figure out what happened between 77 and 83. And to do that, we're going to look closely at the trust deed itself. It's our primary source here.
Yeah.
And we'll also be drawing on some really insightful analysis that helps us unpack the implications of what this document really means.
All right, so first things first, what is a trust deed? I think a lot of people, when they hear that term, they might think, oh, it means Priscilla co-owned Graceland or something like that.
Yeah, that's a common misconception, I think. But it's important to remember that in this situation, a trust deed is more like a security agreement. It's about guaranteeing a debt rather than immediately transferring ownership.
Okay, so it's not like a co-ownership agreement. It's
Yeah.
more like an IOU that's tied to a specific asset.
Precisely. And in this case, the asset is a very specific piece of Elvis's property. The trust deed actually spells it out in detail. And I'm going to quote this directly from the document. It says, part of the Ruth Brown Moore 179.42-acre tract of Lot 3 in Section 2, Township 1, Range 8 West. And all this is recorded in the Shelby County Register's office. So we're talking about a very precise piece of real estate here.
Wow, yeah, that's very specific. So essentially, if Elvis didn't fulfill certain obligations, then Priscilla, as the beneficiary of this trust deed, she had a legal claim against this very specific portion of his property.
Exactly. And those obligations, they would have been laid out in a separate agreement that we unfortunately don't have access to. But the trust deed itself makes it clear that if those obligations weren't met, Priscilla had a legal pathway to take action.
So let's rewind a bit and focus on the date on this trust deed. April 29th, 1977. Elvis Presley is named as the grantor, which basically means he's the one making the guarantee. In this case, he'd be the borrower. And Priscilla Ann Presley is named as the beneficiary, meaning she's the one who stands to gain if the terms of the agreement aren't upheld.
Yeah, and I think what's so crucial to grasp here is that this trust deed established a very real financial claim for Priscilla on Elvis's property, and it did so while he was still alive. This wasn't something that came into effect after his death. It was an existing financial reality.
That really changes how we view this whole situation, right? It wasn't just a personal matter between a former husband and wife. It was a formal financial arrangement with real legal implications. So in a sense, Priscilla had a form of leverage over Elvis and over Graceland.
Right. It's almost like taking out a loan with collateral. If you don't repay the loan, the lender has the right to seize that collateral.
Mhm.
And this trust deed put Priscilla in a similar position with regards to this specific part of Elvis's estate. She held a form of security interest in a portion of Graceland.
Okay, so we have this trust deed, this financial agreement between Elvis and Priscilla. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room, Elvis's estate after his death. Now here's something that might surprise a lot of people. Elvis was incredibly successful, globally famous, but his estate was actually in pretty dire financial straits after he passed away.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? You think Elvis Presley, king of rock and roll, you think wealth and riches. But the truth is there were a lot of factors that led to this financial crisis.
Like, what were some of the biggest contributors to this?
Well, first off, there are the estate taxes, which can be really substantial. And then there was Elvis's well-known generosity. He had a pretty lavish lifestyle, and he was known to be very giving to friends and family.
Mhm.
And on top of all that, there were some challenges in managing his financial affairs effectively, which contributed to the depletion of assets.
So imagine this. You have Graceland, this iconic landmark associated with immense wealth and success. But behind the scenes, the finances are incredibly fragile on the verge of collapse.
Mm.
That's a pretty stark contrast.
Absolutely. And it really underscores why that 1977 trust deed is so significant. It kind of sets the stage for how Priscilla's financial claim would eventually be addressed. And the estate wasn't exactly in a strong position to meet those obligations when Elvis passed away.
Right, they were facing a potential financial meltdown. So then comes this decision, a decision that arguably saved Elvis's legacy and saved Graceland from ruin. And that's the decision by Priscilla, along with others, to open Graceland to the public to turn it into a tourist attraction.
Right, and that was a really bold move at the time. It was a gamble. There was no guarantee that it would be successful. Transforming a private home into a public museum is a huge undertaking and requires a lot of investment.
It was a huge risk for sure, but it ended up being an incredibly smart and successful move. Graceland became and continues to be this massive draw for tourists, generating the much-needed revenue to stabilize the estate's finances. And that's really the key to understanding why that 1977 trust deed wasn't resolved until 1983.
Okay, so the question is, if that trust deed was signed in 77, why do we see evidence of its release happening so much later in 83? We have a notary date on the document that points to 83, and the analysis mentions a 1983 resolution as well.
Right, and what's interesting is that on the trust deed itself, we have this official record stamp along with a recording date of October 11, 1983.
Hmm.
So there was definitely some official activity happening years after the deed was originally signed.
And it seems pretty likely that this delay is directly tied to the precarious financial state of Elvis's estate after his death. You know, if you're on the brink of financial ruin, it's going to be very difficult to settle a significant financial obligation like the one outlined in that trust deed.
Makes sense. So as Graceland started to bring in more and more revenue, as the estate's finances started to stabilize, that's when they were finally in a position to address Priscilla's claim.
Right, and that 1983 release strongly suggests that the debt or obligation outlined in that separate agreement that we don't have suggests that it was finally satisfied.
And there's more evidence to support that conclusion, too. We see Priscilla's signature on the document acknowledging the release of the trust deed and the satisfaction of the debt. And then we have that notary acknowledgement with a date of October 12, 1983. So all the pieces fit together.
It really does paint a clear picture, and it highlights how financial realities can have a huge impact on even the most personal of stories. You know, this wasn't just a matter of Elvis and Priscilla working things out between themselves. This was a complex financial arrangement with real consequences.
So looking back at that 1977 trust deed, its very existence tells us that there was a financial arrangement between Elvis and Priscilla, and that Priscilla felt the need to protect her interests. This wasn't just a casual agreement, it was a legally binding document that gave her real leverage when it came to Elvis's property and to Graceland even before his death.
Absolutely, and it also suggests that Priscilla might have been in the position of a creditor, someone who had extended credit or had a significant financial stake that needed protecting. And this trust deed provided her with the legal tools to enforce that interest if it became necessary.
Right. And that 1983 release marks the end of that chapter. We have Priscilla's signature, the notary acknowledgement, the official recording information. It signifies the resolution of that substantial and complex financial claim from 1977.
And what I find particularly fascinating is how this resolution is so intertwined with the financial recovery of the estate. You know, you have Priscilla's claim in 77. Then you have the financial struggles of the estate after Elvis's death. And then you have this turnaround thanks to Graceland becoming this huge tourist attraction. And then finally you have the release of the trust deed in 83. It's like all these threads are woven together.
It really makes you think differently about Elvis and Priscilla's story and about the legacy of Graceland. It wasn't just a straightforward journey from private home to global icon. There were these behind-the-scenes financial realities that shaped everything.
Right, and it makes you wonder about all the other hidden financial stories that might be out there just waiting to be discovered. Stories that can change how we understand historical events and the lives of famous figures.
Exactly. It reminds us that there's always more to the story than meets the eye. And those financial details, those financial arrangements, they can have a huge impact. And sometimes they can even change the course of history.
Absolutely they can. And I think that's a great note to end on. You know, always be curious, always dig a little deeper because you never know what you might find.
Couldn't agree more. All right, that's it for our deep dive today. We'll be back next time with another fascinating piece of history.
Looking forward to it.